listen to what sounds more like you know how a drum sounds. Listen to what sounds more like a drum. Because that's the purpose of these speakers, is to actually sound like, you know, the real thing. After they made these speakers, they created the Metas because those weren't actually supposed to sound like the real thing anymore. They're supposed to sound like good, like, you know, just at any cost. But there's a lot of value to monitors that just sound like exactly like the real thing that you're recording. The easiest, the best test is actually the kick snare, because everyone knows like the kick bump, and that should sound like really clean and really vivid.
The time has come to show you.
Voices work well too.
I was the last leader of Hyrule. The kingdom which no longer exists.
Like, ironically, to make it so that these could play about 15 hertz lower, the bass isn't as clear as these guys. But it was a pointless sacrifice because the bass you would actually cross over with the subwoofer anyway. So there's no reason why you'd ever want to play this by itself, because it wouldn't really play low enough to play, like, you know, full range. Like, listen to the snap of the kick. Like, notice how one of them sounds soggy while the other one sounds like a snap. And that's important because the kick obviously, like, sets the rhythm of the whole entire piece, sets the mood and everything, but also it could get in the way and interfere with everything because it is such a constant. It's the heartbeat of the song. So if the kick is not smooth and constant and doesn't sound realistic, then it'll interfere with all the other instruments and cause artifacting. That's why these sound just more 3D. I wish you could compare them side by side, but if you have your, like, you know, your own speakers, like, usually movie theaters use JBL and clips, which makes it so that your ears get accustomed to the idea that movies sound like JBL and clips. But real life instruments, if you go to like a nightclub or something like that, and you listen to drums or guitar, use that as a reference, because that's what these are supposed to actually be referencing. or a piano.
The great calamity was merciless. It devastated everything in its path. A century ago, it was then that life was taken away from me. And since that time, here I have remained in spirit form.
What's weird is that even though these have the advantage of being closer together, so they have the automatic, if you're closer to a speaker, it automatically sounds better. It's kind of how you cheat. It's kind of like how you turn up a speaker a little bit, it automatically sounds better. So these have the advantage of sounding richer because they're close together. So they should actually have a better, also center weighted, like phantom center image. These are wider set, so it should have a penalty and should actually have a looser, more fuzzy center image. But the center image is, I can't even say clearer, because what's weird about it is that these cast more of a 3D sound, and that's why they actually have like that contour, whereas these cast more of like a 2D sound stage, which is why it has that shape. It's a convex shape. Yeah, see, well, once you add like subwoofers, then like the extra capacity of this thing ends up being a downside, really. Besides that, the positioning is really what you gain. Like, if you plop these down, you will not fail. They're gonna be, axially aligned perfectly. If you plop those down, you will fail. Unless you actually, tried really hard. Or you get the stands, which are rare. And most people don't get the stands. But it's also important to get obviously, source matters. So it's important to get a DAC that could play up high enough so that the resolution would make a difference. Because obviously, if you're only playing like 48 kilohertz versus 192 kilohertz, then you're not going to hear much of a difference. And a lot of people hate on Spotify, but I have to say Spotify has gotten really good with their codec. As much as I hate on Google, Google has also gotten really good with the codec. And the reason why is because sound, they found, is because it takes much less bandwidth to transfer sound than it does to transfer video. So if you could make it so that the sound of an audio video, of like a YouTube video, sounds perfectly high fidelity, and you could have the video, go in and out, warble in and out, depending on like your connection. It doesn't really matter as much versus the other way around. Like if the video was set to like constantly HD, but then the sound kept warbling in and out, that would actually bother you a lot more. Like humans are actually a lot more, audio centric than they are anything else, because ears, your ears are the only sense you have that could always hear in 360, even when you're asleep, and you can't shut them off, and you don't have to move them, and you can focus in on three-dimensional space, whether it's above, below, behind, something moving, like scurrying behind from the bush to behind you from the left to behind you to the right. You could judge the size of the animal. You could judge the speed of the animal without even moving your head, based off of the way that your ears are just so tuned that you don't even have to like move them, and you could actually tell and focus in on an animal and locate it. That's how amazing our ears are. You can like listen to a whole entire like live musical performance and just choose to listen to only the annoying person next to you, and then just choose to listen to only the drummer's right stick, and then choose to only listen to the singer without moving anything. It's just, your ears are really just that amazing at 3D imagery. And stereo is actually 3D. If you actually get stereo right, I mean, that's why they don't call it binaural, they call it stereo. Because stereo in Greek actually means solid. So stereophonic sound actually means solid sound. And Nintendo actually does a really good job with that. Like their new Nintendo Switch, they just upgraded their speakers to full stereo. So it's actually 360 sound now. You can actually turn around and hear water behind you. You can hear the whole entire soundscape rotate around you. The 3DS also had speakers that were large enough to do that, and they were configured in high fidelity enough to do that, where you could actually, like, you know, play Metroid or something like that, and be rolling through like a tube, and you could hear like the echo, your own echo behind you, and as you exit out, the door behind you would close, and you'd hear the door actually close behind you, which was really trippy on like a handheld device. But yeah, I love hanging out here and just listening to music. But what's cool is that the other sound system I got isn't actually bad. It's just different. That has more of a 90s kick to it. That was designed to actually, because the 90s were designed during the grunge era, when they created the fuzz, which was a type of like pink noise distortion that grunge music was founded on. It also created things like, you know, the Cranberries used it a lot, Smashing Pumpkins used it a lot. It was a type of very soft distortion, and that's actually called pink noise. It's out of phase distortion. So when they made the speakers in my other room, they actually designed it for that type of music. So it's not designed like to sound as good for something like EDM, but it's designed to sound really good for things like rock music, and even for movies it actually sounds better because it actually emphasizes more of the background, the pink noise, the out of phase sounds than these do. These are designed like clocks. They're designed so that they work with like exact precision, so that you pretty much get all the sound hitting the ears at exactly the same time, no matter where you are in the room. To the point where the crossover is like 3 pieces on the inside. It's so mechanically like a clock that like this thing is to this thing, as this thing is to this thing, as this whole entire thing here is to this thing. And the same thing applies here. The tweeter is to this thing, as the whole assembly is to this thing. Which is, if you were to take this whole entire assembly and compare that to its effect on this outer rim right here, which also works as waveguide. So this thing actually doesn't, they actually made a speaker, this one specifically, to test it. And that's like the only reason why they made it. And that's why it's like made out of solid metal and everything. That's kind of a clue that they're like doing like prototyping. You could actually set the speaker, it's actually a 2-way. There's a tweeter in the middle and there's a woofer on the outside, right? You could actually set it so that it's a 2-way, so that the tweeter plays and there's a crossover point, and then the woofer plays, right?
but you could also connect it to play it as if it's a one-way speaker, so that the tweeter and the woofer do the exact same thing. They play as if they're just one speaker. And you'll actually not really be able to tell the difference. You'll hear a certain lack of, like, you'll lose clarity, but it'll actually sound more forgiving. It'll sound like more, especially if you're up close, it won't sound as harsh. So it's really up to you if you wanted to mod them. So for these, they're actually set to play as a one-way speaker. Even though the tweeter and the woofer can play as a two-way, since I'm using them as side speakers, I'd rather they just sound, just kind of blend in. And not, one of the most important things about speakers is that the speakers draw no attention to themselves. And sound should sound like it's just emanating from the air. So I got rid of any difference between the tweeter and the woofer, so that the tweeter and the woofer actually play completely in sync. So this is now really a one-way speaker. But with the materials that I could actually play high enough when it needs to get the tweeter to produce the high enough frequencies, and low enough when it needs to get the woofer to play low enough frequencies when it needs to do that low. But it doesn't have a crossover. It's just playing straight through. So it actually kind of works a little bit better. So I'm sacrificing a little bit of the fidelity, but you end up with a much smoother sound. So it's a pretty cool little hack that you could do if you get these speakers and you use them as surround sound speakers. And then you can switch them back. If you want to use them as little small monitors, you could just reconnect them and make them two-way. And then you would actually be able to, have the crossover at 2.7 again. And, judge them that way, listen to them, test them that way. But as just relaxing, you don't really care, put them around your room type speakers, they actually work remarkably well as a one-way speaker, where you could just have the tweeter and the woofer play in perfect synchronicity, as if they're one speaker, which is really weird, because that's not what's supposed to happen. If you were to do that normally, the tweeter and the woofer would actually cause interference. It would cause lobing, because the phase abnormalities of the fact that the woofer moves slower and the tweeter moves faster, and the tweeter has to reflect off of the woofer, would cause all sorts of disturbances. But with these speakers, the way they designed it, so that there's actually, it's hidden behind here. So I can remove it. Yeah, hidden behind here, they actually added the same type of concaved design that they added on the blade and the 3000X. So they sacrificed the bass they could have had, the bassousness, by making it actually sealed and have less space inside, so they could actually have an inner rim, an inner contour, so that then this tweeter and this woofer can combine in this fixed outer convex uniform waveguide. So no matter what the two are doing, they end up combining anyway. So I thought that was pretty clever. Because on the other hand, when they made the eggs, they did the exact opposite. See, these are the eggs, so they actually try to maximize the amount of space they can have as much as possible. These are 74 hertz at the port in the back, and they're also 2.7 kilohertz, which is how they've always been. The eggs are a lineage. They still make them. The current ones that just came out last year called the egg duos. And they're still the exact same thing, where the port, instead of the port being on the bottom, they just moved it to the top. But it's still the same exact shape with a convexed front to give it more capacity on the inside to allow for more bass. And yeah, this show is the same exact size and same exact shape and the same exact form factor. But interestingly enough, this was the only ones ever made in solid, like, automotive grade materials. After that, they started making them out of plastic. I mean, high quality plastic. The E3s were high quality plastic, but then they started making them out of like lower and lower quality plastic because they're just meant to be entry level speakers. But these, because of the fact that they were just using them to like test stuff, they're kind of the midway test between this and these guys, which also has a copper hood on top and a solid rounded back made out of one sheet of MDF. And the proportions are designed to be, like I was saying before, conducive to like the whole like 90s buzz rock era. So they actually played with doing everything they can to make it so that there's no standing waves. And everything sounds like there's no speaker, pretty much. So the proportions of this to this is the same as the proportions to this to there. And that's actually phi. It's the golden spiral. And it's the same thing as between here to here to here to here to here to there. And when you actually, when you shine, or not shine, when you play the speaker straight at a wall, it can't create standing waves. Because these two speakers will never ever play in sync, even though they're electronically play in sync. And even if you tried to make them play in sync, they just wouldn't. Because the cabin pressure is so different that since this is 1 to the 1.7 of this, you couldn't get the two to play in sync. This will always play as if it's a little bit behind. And the same applies for this. This woofer right here is meant to match this woofer right here, but it'll always sound like it's a little bit behind. So this speaker gives you the impression that it's deeper than it really is. So on the inside, they use like, you know, the rounded everything, like the bowed front and the bowed back and the copper top to make sure that, you know, it's most stable on top, so the thing has no ability to wobble at all. And the sections, how this is sealed so that it's literally 3 speakers stacked on top. So if I decapitated this speaker right here, it would actually be a 2-way speaker and it would still work just as well. It would basically be a gigantic version of that thing. And that's pretty much what they were working on at the time, was pretty much just how to get that to work. And how to evolve that to the next step. So you can see how from taking the top off of this thing and taking this thing, and then go back and look at the UniQ Tech Museum and look at the 207.2s, you can see how from there they went from playing with these guys and seeing how they can make it work more clock-like with less reliance on a crossover and more just on the actual engineering of the parts themselves to work as an individual whole. Two, so I'm booting up my watch right now. So I actually got like these things are you actually sell these things for about $80 each. But I made my own back feet out of magnets and BBs. So they're actually technically floating on BBs. So it's kind of like an R2-D2 design. Because I needed it to be exactly perfect so that these things are the same exact as the ones over there. And these BBs are the same exact as the ones over there. So the angle is exactly aligned perfectly. But what's cool with these guys is that, see these spikes? If you wanted to have more of like a visceral rumble, you could actually place it on its side. So it'll actually shake it'll couple with your floor, and your floor will become a radiator, a bass radiator, and you actually feel more like of a rumble in your room. It's kind of like a cheap hack to get like, you know, like movie theater, cinematic high octane explosions and stuff, but it works. You can put it underneath your couch, and if you're playing like a video game, it actually feels like you have a couch rumbler, which is pretty fun. And this is actually like easy enough to move that I could actually have another cable that I have under the seat in there, that I could just pick this thing up, pull out the little glass that I have, a rounded glass that I actually have underneath the seat back there, that I could slide out, place this thing on top of, since this already has a tripod, and then slide the glass back underneath, connect the two plugs, and then I can have it so that my movie nights have an extra couch rumbler. But I usually just leave them out here because I like having the stereo bass. But yeah, this is something that's really, I always thought was like really interesting about like the way that they experiment with stuff. Here, actually, I'm gonna have a flashlight. This is a flashlight. Yeah, those comes out whenever music's playing. Yeah, rats actually love music. I remember like I made a bunch of videos showing how much like all our rats would always come out whenever we play music. And there was a study about like maybe about a year ago that verified how much rats actually love music. And it makes sense. I mean, every animal has a heartbeat, and every animal comes from you know, all mammals come from a womb where they hear a constant heartbeat, and they hear each other's heartbeats, and they synchronize to them. So they're constantly in pretty much a little EDM chill room. Rito. Yeah, you listen to the music. So I'll grab my flashlight. Yeah, he's actually 3 years old. You can still do like really, really big hops. And he's still really, really fit for his age, which is really cool. Naturally, in the wild, they live to between about 3 and 5 years. And what's funny is they're the primary predator of mice. And you know what that means? Where you have rats, you actually eliminate cats. And that's one of the main reasons why they're blamed for the Black Plague.
even though rats actually cannot get the plague. They can't even get rabies. They're basically like immune from most diseases. Because if you think about it, the way rats live are communal. And if they could get something like the plague, they would all die out. But instead, even though they live communally and they share everything and they live everywhere, they live in more spots than we do. Literally, like, you could go to a volcano that a human being has never stepped foot on and find rats. And it's still the same species, Rattus rattus. You can go to the Arctic and find rats. You can go to the freaking local Best Buys right there and find rats. And some of them are actually growing opposable thumbs. So there's a theory that they're actually going to be the next in line after human beings, you know, wipe themselves out. Because they're just so good at colonizing and setting up shop. Unlike humans, they think of terrain completely three-dimensionally, and they have the ability to sense the world around them acoustically. So they could run through a pitch black maze in one pass, using only the air and the resonance of the actual chamber of the maze itself to find the exit. That's why their ears, they could move them, but they don't actually focus them the same way that dogs and other animals do. They just kind of like use them as a way of, like, you know, they're more of a, like the sclera of our eyes. See how when he moved, he didn't really move his ears? They're more like the sclera of our eyes. They use them to signal to others where to listen toward. But the inside of the ears actually has the same formation as the inside of our ears. Yeah, thank you. See those folds in there? Yeah, rats love music. See that shimmering shine? Some of it's the stain. I'll wipe it down. But there's actually a shimmery layer of silica in there. I'm trying to get a better angle of it. It's surprisingly hard to catch on camera. You can see it like really easily with your eyes. You just kind of like look around, but on cameras, oh, there it is. See it? The shimmer. Well, that shimmer is actually made out of the composite of this polymer, but it's painted on the side of this wood. To make it match. Because the side is wooden and isn't the same polymer, they had to get that same shimmer to make it match. Where can I get the camera into angle to show the shimmer? Well, trust me, it's there. For some reason, cameras are just terrible at capturing that. And that's why eyes are much better than cameras. But what's funny is that the original use of this paint actually came from here. They actually painted the black with the same layer of, it's a doping compound is what it is, to get the woofer to be stiff and mass loaded to what they wanted it to be, using the same resin. I'm gonna take pictures of the shimmer, I guess. But yeah, this shimmer right here, if I move the light around, you'll probably be able to see it more easily, but this camera is just not doing a good job of capturing the shimmer. Because the hard part about capturing things is that it's, when you're capturing something like a shimmer, you're actually capturing a reflection. And the camera is refusing to capture the reflection. Yeah, but this black right here, this painted black, is the same as this painted black. Which, this polymer is a thickened form of the doping compound they use here, and the paint, which was derived from the doping compound, they used to paint the sides of the illicit piece. This doesn't have a shimmer, because it is just rubber silicone. But this rubber silicone is the same rubber silicone they end up using on the Z-Flex. Loops around. But yeah, so this concludes my tour. But yeah, all it really matters is that like you have to make sure that your source is good enough that you could actually tell the difference. Like sometimes I run this with 2 amps, but I found that kind of egregious. I used to have a dual stack of amps here, and I don't know, I thought that took too much space, so I just got rid of it. But having a really high quality DAC isn't really that expensive. You just kind of look at, like, just ignore the name brand and just look at the actual specs and make sure it plays above 22 kilohertz, and make sure it plays with a very, very low, like, comparative. You know, there's actually charts to compare it with, like, $3,000 DACs to $10,000 DACs, and if it's within the same, you know, range, get it, because it's really all the same. There's this whole explosion called Chi-Fi that came out, and this is Topping, and Topping is one of like the main Chi-Fi brands that came out. And the reason why China is kind of killing it at drones and the e-wheel, like, you know, IEVs, like individual electric vehicles, is because they are really, really, really good at DSP. And DSP is like the foundation of things like drones, things like, you know, efficiency at getting, you know, your batteries to drive each of your wheels. And if you actually look at the throttle, it really just works like pretty much volume, amplitude, and frequency, which is pretty funny. Like even the Americanized version, the Segway, that was pretty much just using a G sensor as what you would use as a hand throttle. So instead of using a hand throttle, it used a G sensor. so you would lean forward instead of, just throttling forward. And that was retarded, because then other people started making the same exact thing where they added a third wheel, which is what everyone was like, hey, why didn't you add a third wheel? And why'd you make the stupid, like pretty much the stupidest invention you ever made, and then literally kill yourself with it by rolling off of a cliff. So that pretty much turned America off of e-wheel technology and drone technology for 20 years, and successfully made it so that we just kind of like thought that e-wheel and drone technology was like just toys. And for 20 years we just made our cars bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where you could actually take a normal, like, what are they called? The new form of the caravan. It's pretty much like the caravan for people with midlife crises. I don't know much about cars. I think they're called SUVs. Yeah, you can take an SUV or like a modern day like pickup truck, and you can actually line up a bunch of 9-year-olds right from the bumper back to back, and you can actually run right through them, and you wouldn't even know until you hit the 9th child. That's how successfully we've actually made cars. They could actually run over 9 children before you 8 children before you'd even notice one scream. Because GM makes cars, they work for the DoD, and they're mostly made for the military. That's why our cars, that's why we live in such a car-centric world in America. That's why our highways basically are a penal code state, and you give up all your rights just by signing up for a driver's license to do a thing that is banned, which is to operate a motorized vehicle on a highway, on a public road. That is banned, so you have to get a license. And if you have a license, that means that they have the ability to pull you over to check to make sure you're not doing the illegal act of driving a motorized vehicle. And since you are doing an illegal act inherently by driving, you forfeit all your rights, which is why people get dragged out of their cars, why cops could break your windows and just pull you out, which is pretty funny. Yeah, cars are not freedom, and I'm really glad to see that bikes and EVs are starting to take over, and 15-minute towns are starting to take over. And I live in one, which is pretty cool. Anyway, thanks.